Chinese families are spending $200,000 on foreign degrees. Some of their kids come home to $257 a month jobs. You think this is a story about education, but it's actually a story about poverty and what an entire nation will sacrifice to escape a system designed to keep them in place. I'm John, a sociologist who spent over a decade around Chinese international students in Canada, Korea, the US, and the UK. And I dug into weeks of education and immigration data to answer this question. When you understand the system these families are escaping, the bet isn't insane. It's actually the most rational choice they've got. In the next few minutes, I'll explain it comes down to three social forces. Stick around to the end because you'll understand why this flow of international students has been inevitable for 40 years and why the math just broke. Sure, we see the students on campus and in the city, but let's really wrap our heads around the scale of this phenomenon. In the late 70s, Deng Xiaoping launched Reform and Opening Up. China began trickling students abroad, mostly government-funded grad students in technical fields. These were the cream of the crop, and many chose to stay abroad if possible. By the 1990s, China's economy was booming. A new middle class emerged who were obsessed with educational opportunities for their children. By the turn of the millennium, families started paying out of pocket. But the 2010s was when things really picked up. China exploded to become the #1 source of international students to the West. At the peak in 2019, nearly 370,000 Chinese students were studying in the US alone. There are more Chinese international students in America than the next 5 countries combined. The flow seemed unstoppable. A lot of people in the West automatically default to the idea, yeah, Chinese tiger parents send their kids here because they obsess over prestigious university degrees. But they're wrong. There's actually 2 overarching push factors. In the late 90s, to meet the demand for higher education, China launched a university expansion policy, opening many universities. Along with this expansion, enrollment for universities tripled in less than a decade. This led to more graduates, but the number of jobs didn't grow as quickly. The result was credential inflation. The bachelor's degree that used to guarantee a good job now barely gets you an interview. This was the first push factor. The second push factor is a system most outsiders have never heard of, 户口, which is China's household registration system. Your 户口demands where you can legally live, work, access healthcare, and send your kids to school. You are literally registered to a city and locked there. If you're stuck in a backwater city, it's very hard to get the resources to make it into a top university. Getting into a top-tier city like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen was seen as the key to success. But that takes top credentials, connections, or both. As a result, foreign degrees became a hack to bypass domestic competition entirely. If you come back with a foreign degree, you get to skip the line for the cities and jobs that domestic grads are fighting over. But every hack has a cost, and this one has a trap built into it. Quick plug, if you want more deep dives like this, please like and sub. Every year, over 13 million students sit for the Gaokao, China's national college entrance exam. It's one test over 2 days. The Gaokao isn't like the SAT or A-levels, where it's one factor among many. In China, it's the factor. The entire country goes quiet during testing hours. Police escort late students to exam halls, parents wait outside the heat for hours, and the cities reroute traffic so nothing disturbs the test takers. It's literal government policy. The test is scored on a 750-point scale, and the cutoff scores vary by province and by university tier. To enter Tier 1 universities, what Chinese call the 985 and the 211 schools, you need to be around the 95th percentile. If you miss by a single point, you're permanently sorted into Tier 2. And Tier 2 credentials have dramatically different outcomes. Employers openly list 985 and 211 graduates only in job postings. Just imagine, if American employers could legally say Ivy League graduates only on every job posting, that's pretty unacceptable in the West.
It's not true. That's impossible.
But in China, that's not hypothetical. Every year, students graduate university. In 2025, nearly 12.2 million new graduates flooded the Chinese job market at the same time. That's the entire population of New York City applying for the same jobs at the same time, every single summer. The Chinese have a word for this, 内卷, involution. It's been one of China's top buzzwords, with hashtags hitting over 1 billion views. The BBC defines it as one's endless pursuit of improvement due to an unwillingness to fall behind in competition. It's like being in a movie theater where the person in the front stands up to see better, now the second row has to stand up, and eventually everyone is standing. No one has a better view than before, but now everyone's legs are tired. That's involution. The effort inflates, but the outcome doesn't. So what happens to families who see this coming? Even though the one-child policy has ended, most families still pour everything into a single child. That kid is both the lottery ticket and the retirement plan for 2 parents and 4 grandparents. And that's why back in 2021, when China kicked off the tutoring ban, tutoring didn't disappear, just got more expensive. If you want to learn more about this ban, check out the video here. Now, parents who went through the Gaokao themselves know the stakes firsthand. They remember the pressure. They remember the friend who missed the cutoff by a few points and watched their prospects collapse. And now, they're looking at their own child, facing 13 million competitors. So the choice becomes obvious. Spend 200 grand on a foreign degree, or risk your child sorting into tier 2 and a lifetime of diminished prospects. And here's the thing that most people miss. When I was at Penn and Oxford, I saw that not every family writing that check is wealthy. Some of my closest friends told me how it was a huge gamble for their family to invest in their studies overseas. It's basically families mortgaging apartments and grandparents liquidating retirement for one single shot. It's the same logic as not putting all your money into one stock. Why bet everything on a single exam when you can buy a backup path? Parents on Chinese social media actively discuss whether to vote with their feet rather than fight the Gaokao system. And some families aren't waiting until university. There's a growing trend of parents sending children to overseas boarding schools at high school, or even at the middle school level. Or sometimes it's just the mom that flies over with the kids, and they get a place in the West, and their kids go to school in the West, while the dad makes money in China. Whatever the way it's done, the goal is to bypass the Chinese school system entirely and prep them for Ivy League from age 14. I've lived in Toronto, Seattle, and Calgary over the last 5 years, and these kids are literally my children's classmates. These kids won't take the Gaokao at all. They'll do A-levels, IB, or AP courses instead. They'll grow up speaking English fluently, and they'll enter Western university admissions as international students, but ones who've already been in the system for years. Even though it's expensive and disruptive, families are still going all in because they see it as the cleanest way to sidestep the whole system. Now, if you're thinking this is helicopter parenting, it's actually wrong. It's actually a rational response to a system that offers no second chances. And the symbiosis with the West is actually quite elegant. Foreign universities need tuition revenue. International students often pay full sticker price, often 2 or 3 times more than the local students, and essentially they subsidize the domestic students. And during a time when education is getting more expensive and salaries are inflating, these international students are a useful lifeline for universities. At the same time, Chinese families need that credential differentiation that I mentioned earlier. But this arrangement only works if Chinese employers actually value foreign degrees more than domestic ones. And here's the strange part. They did until quite recently, even when the domestic degree is from an excellent school. But more on that later. American universities are selling prestige at full price, and Chinese families are lining up to buy. But no one buys without running the numbers, and there's one number that powered this entire pipeline. 17.2%. That was the number that powered the pipeline for a decade. In 2016 to 17, someone with a foreign degree earns 17.2% more than someone with a Chinese degree in the same job. This was the ROI calculation that made $200,000 look rational. In 2016, a domestic graduate in China started at around 4,500 RMB a month. A returnee with a foreign degree started at around 5,300. That's the 17.2% premium. It doesn't sound like much, but if you run it forward over a 30-year career, that gap is worth about 5 extra years of salary. That's what makes a house down payment feel like an investment, not a gamble. But like I said earlier, that premium is collapsing. A few years back, average returnee salaries dropped from 268,200 RMB in 2020 to 204,500 RMB in 2023. That's a 24% decline in just 3 years. And it gets worse. Some recent graduates with foreign degrees are earning as little as 4,000 RMB per month. Let that sink in. 4,000 RMB is about 570 USD a month. For a degree that costed 200 grand, and that's for public universities. You'll need to double it for private US schools. The reason for this is 4 things broke. First, oversupply. So many Chinese students went abroad that foreign degrees no longer felt rare.
Get a car! You get a car! Everybody gets a car!
Second, employer taste shifted. Chinese employers, especially in high-paying sectors like finance and tech, now prefer graduates from 985 and 211 universities. Basically, the domestic degree says that you survived China's education squid game. The foreign one says that you dodged it. Third, the skills mismatch. Returnees used to leverage English fluency for international business roles, but if AI like DeepSeek can do the job better and faster than you, your edge just got automated away. Fourth, networks. Going overseas means you didn't develop local networks, and relationships, or 关系, in these domestic circles still matter a lot. And here's the uncomfortable truth that Chinese families are starting to realize. The S-tier schools like Harvards, Oxfords, and MITs of the world are still brutally competitive. But most Chinese students aren't going to S-tier. They're going 1 to 2 tiers below. Solid, reputable schools. The main problem is they're easier to get into than Peking University or Tsinghua University, and Chinese universities are improving rapidly. And employers know the difference. When they see a degree from a mid-foreign university, the signal isn't "I'm exceptional," it is "I had money." So why were Chinese credentials worth less inside China than foreign ones in the first place? It's quite simple, actually. Credential value was never just about education quality. It was about signaling. But signals decay when everyone sends them. And that's exactly what's happening. And promotion data within companies build over time, probably with some companies finding that the internationals weren't worth their premium. But for many families sending their children abroad, there's still one prize that hasn't collapsed. Anthropologist Aihua Ang calls this flexible citizenship. Families treating passports and residency like infrastructure. Study here, invest there, keep your options open everywhere. The foreign degree is no longer just about education. It's a foothold, pathways to permanent residencies, work visas, and maybe citizenship down the line, because it's the ultimate insurance policy. If things go well in China, great, you've got options. If things go badly, you've got an exit. Having lived in Canada, the US, and the UK, almost every first and sometimes second generation Chinese person knows this game. I literally have friends who grew up in the West, made their money in the West, but they're now buying homes in East Asia to prepare for a snowbird retirement, which basically means they fly to Asia when it's cold and they go back to North America when it's warmer. But even this flexible citizenship calculation is shifting because almost everyone chooses to go back to Asia. Since 1978, 86% of all Chinese students who completed overseas studies have returned home, and the pace is accelerating. In 2024 alone, 495,000 came back, up 19% from the year before. And it's not just average graduates. Roughly 92% of verified Tsinghua alumni are now based in China. Among those who studied abroad, over 60% have returned. Only about 10% of Tsinghua graduates are even pursuing studies abroad. But here's the nuance. That 86% of returnees is mostly driven by master's and bachelor students. The S-tier folks, well, for years, they've stayed west. 90% of Chinese STEM PhDs from US universities between 2000 and 2015 chose to stay. But even that's cracking. Stay rates have dropped to the low 80s and they're still falling. And the major factor behind that is that they're being pulled back to Asia by research and startup funding that's beginning to compete with the US. So this isn't the brain drain story that we all grew up hearing about. It's a college degree trip with a planned return, and the return is actually becoming the default. But now this trip is getting expensive. For many families below the S tier, the math no longer works. So what happens when a 40-year pipeline starts to crack? In the US, new Chinese student enrollments fell almost 4% in 2024 to 2025. Canada slashed international students' intake by 60%. The countries that banked on Chinese tuition money are now watching the numbers drop. 3 things happened at the same time. First, the West is making it harder to get in and less safe once you're there. More than 1 in 3 Chinese student visa applications are now getting rejected in the US, a 36% rejection rate compared to roughly 10% globally.
We want to know where those students come. Are they troublemakers? What countries do they come? And we don't want them making trouble in our country.
Trump's 2025 policies targeted Chinese STEM students, and the Stop CCP Visas Act proposes banning Chinese nationals from student visas entirely. Canada, the UK, and Australia has followed similar patterns in tightening things up. But the students aren't disappearing, they're simply redirecting. Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong are absorbing the flow. In the case of Malaysia, their universities grew their Chinese student population by 25%. The map is literally being redrawn in real time. And it's not just policy, the perception of America has also shifted. Chinese state media amplifies every anti-Asian incident. The framing back home, America doesn't want you. Whether or not that's true, it's the story families hear when deciding where to send their kids. The second thing that happened is the domestic opt-out. Remember when I was talking about the involution theater where everyone's standing? Some students have decided to lie down. Right now, there's a counter movement called Tangping, which means lying flat. Why kill yourself for a tier 1 university when the job market is oversaturated anyway? Why spend a fortune abroad when you can simply live at home? Lying flat is what happens when a generation looks at the scoreboard and decides the game isn't worth playing, and it's spreading. Especially among younger Chinese who watched others before them grind through the system and end up jobless anyway. And remember the Gaokao Trap? When the belief that escape is possible erodes, when the effort no longer seems worth the uncertain payoff, more families choose to sit on that 200 grand nest egg instead. Third, the domestic comeback. The assumption that foreign universities are simply better than Chinese ones is crumbling. Tsinghua is ranked 12th globally now, higher than Cornell, Duke, and Johns Hopkins. Across major global ranking systems, Chinese universities now outnumber American ones. The first time that ever happened. Why would you pay full cost to go somewhere when your domestic option is pretty solid? In other words, the three things are policy walls, safety fears, and rising domestic alternatives, all happening at once. The countries that won this competition, America, Canada, and the UK, are now actively losing it. And they built their budgets on the assumption that it would last. Full-price international students subsidizing discounted domestic seats. But as we see recently, it's all falling apart. So when the pipeline shrinks, the math breaks. There's a question Chinese students ask each other. 月亮在外国更圆吗? Is the moon rounder abroad? This was actually first raised in Vanessa Fong's study of foreign international students abroad. And that was the core question in her book. Because that was the first instance of people showing regret of going abroad. For 40 years, enough families believed that the moon was rounder abroad, creating the largest student migration in human history. But a generation that grew up with high-speed rail, mobile payments, and world-class domestic universities doesn't look at the West the same way their parents did. Researcher Huang Haifeng calls it the swing from the moon is rounder abroad to 厉害了我的国, which stands for bravo, my country. The old belief that foreign meant better is fading, and when you no longer believe the moon is rounder somewhere else, you stop buying the ticket. The moon abroad has craters the brochures don't mention, and the moon at home is brighter than it used to be. So the question isn't why Chinese international students keep coming. The question is, what happens when they stop? If you like this video, you like this one. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and sub.